Hello and welcome to the Adam Thomas Music Channel, where today we're going to be talking a little bit about the bass guitar. So if you've been studying bass for a while, looking into the history of the instrument, or you've met or played with some older bass players, you've probably come across this little nugget of wisdom, that the bass guitar will sound better with older strings. This has been a long-touted hypothesis about how to get better bass tone, and it's even been backed up by famous bass players like James Jamerson, who would famously just refuse to ever change the strings on his bass until they were breaking and falling off. And as well as that, he would also refuse to clean or maintain the bass. So today, we're going to be putting his theory to the absolute test. So what I have here is an old Cruiser Crafter bass that is, quite old. In fact, I'm going to do a couple of sweeping shots on how unkept it is. Lots of dust, lots of grime, and but the main event for this video will be the strings. Now, I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell just by looking in this, or you can see a little bit of rust there, but these strings are very, very old. In fact, I bought this bass from my friend Dave, thank you Dave, for about 20 quid in either about 2009 or 2010. And with the exception of the G string, which is actually a guitar's low E string, which I put on about a year after I bought it, I have not changed any of the strings. Meaning that these strings are a minimum of 10 years old. I think they're more than that. I personally imagine these are probably around about 12 years old. But these are worn out, rusty old, grimy strings. As well as that, I've got some grime around here, and the fretboard needs a serious cleaning. In fact, I'm going to be doing, just before I do a full-on bass review of this bass, I'm going to actually be doing a how to restring your bass video, and it's going to get a hell of a cleaning then. So in this video, we're going to be taking the bass in its current configuration with its current strings, and then after I restring it, I'm going to clean everything. I'm going to give it proper nice new round strings. It's going to be round versus round. Unfortunately, I know James Jamerson would use flat wounds, but we're going to be using round rounds today. But that should still give us a really, really good idea. Like I said, these are hellishly old strings. This is really a very, very long-term experiment. So how's it going to sound? I'm going to be doing a couple of different sound tests here or there. I'm going to be doing short clips here or there, mostly playing with my fingers, as I do prefer to play bass with my fingers, but I'm going to be doing, I do a G major scale, which I'm going to do with a plectrum and with my fingers, and then I'm going to do a simple 12-bar blues walking bass line, both with a backing track and without a backing track for you to hear. One last thing before we actually hear the bass itself, just for the setup, I've tried to make it as simple as possible so we're hearing just the bass. So it's simply the bass, plugged in through obviously a jack lead, going straight into my audio interface actually, which is an M-Audio M-Track Plus, going straight into Pro Tools. I'm not using any amp simulators, no effects, nothing. This is the straight bass, straight into the audio interface, like you're plugging straight into a mixing desk. So we're going to hear purely the bass. I'm not going to change any of the controls, so I'm going to have both the bridge and the neck pickup on full blast, and the tone pot turned all the way up as well. Fully open, just the bass, no going between the two, just to hear the bass on its own. I'm going to try and get rid of all the other parameters, just how the bass sounds itself. So let's hear how it sounds with the old strings versus the new. And so there you have it. Here we are. The bass has its new strings. It's all cleaned up. I've lemon oiled up the fretboard. All nice and clean, all fixed up. Brand new strings. So what do you think of it? So now, what do I think? Is old James Jameson right? Well, I kind of think that depends on the style of music you play. After going over and listening to these tracks again, I feel that in the full mix of the 12-bar blues, I think that once it goes into the second time round where I start going dum 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 as I'm playing rather than just doing a straight bass line, I feel like the new strings sort of snap through a little bit more, but I find playing that, I find it's kind of difficult to hear a big difference. I find the bigger difference when you're starting to play sort of different styles and more on its own. The slap lends itself very, very nicely to the new strings, but interestingly enough, I actually felt that the plectrum playing on the major scale actually sounded a little bit nicer, a bit more sort of rock and roll with the older strings. It has that old sort of like punkier sound, whereas the newer strings I felt were almost a bit too bright, a bit too snappy for that. James Jameson I think was a Motown bassist, so I think that definitely lends itself to that style, having that sort of older, warmer sound. Personally, I wouldn't go as far as leaving strings to be 10 years old again. Personally, depending on what I'm playing, I feel like sometimes I like to play jazz on my bass, and I feel that if I'm playing slap, obviously I want brand new strings, but I feel that if it's older, if I'm trying to get the sound of a double bass, I'll use older strings. If it's like an older style as well, I'm trying to get that older sound. But if I'm playing sort of more like snappier, sort of almost rock-inspired fusion, I feel like I want the brighter, newer strings, and especially when a lot of the time I play metal, and it sort of has that like Steve Harris really bright, like a sort of snappy sound. I quite like that sound myself. I think really it is down to what your own personal taste is. I feel that neither is particularly correct or wrong. Personally myself, if I was about to go on tour playing bass, or if I was about to like record an album, I'd personally put new strings on my bass. I'd much rather have that. Or I feel like what you could do is use something like, if you want to get the older sound, is something like using flat wounds, or stick them on a week or two if you're not going to be sort of touring them to death before you intend to record. That should dull them down just enough to get that sound. But I still feel like it's possibly easier to sort of, if you wanted to produce the sound more, so using newer strings and then actually EQing it to be sort of more duller sounding, I feel like you'd probably have a bit more success with that than trying to do it the opposite way around, taking much duller older strings and trying to make them sound a lot more snappy. One bone I do have to pick with old Jameson though is I do think you should maintain and clean your bass and keep it in a nice playing order, regardless of whether the strings are old or not. It's just much nicer that way, easier to play, and I think that the bigger change in sound is coming from the different strings, rather than sort of cleaning it, although cleaning it will give you a difference enough in sound, but I think you should still keep your instrument in pretty good nick. And so, yeah, do you have any questions about this? Is there something else you'd have rather I've tested? What could I do better? What could I do differently? And I hope you found this useful, and if you enjoyed, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.